Thank you, Chairman Nuri Turkel.
Thank you.
I want to thank Yusuf for providing us with this opportunity. I would like to touch the issue of today's hearing through a policy perspective, and would like to submit the full text of my testimony for the record, and will give a gist here, with your permission, Chairman.
Yes.
In recent
Thank you.
years, particularly following the assumption of office by President Xi Jinping, the Chinese government's policy on Tibetan religion has moved from total destruction of Tibetan religious institutions and systems to one of insidious control in an attempt to serve its own political objectives, which includes sinicizing Tibetan Buddhism and co-opting the right to determine Tibetan Buddhists' own leaders and mode of practice. Over the years, they have attempted to do this through promulgation of various regulations to bring Tibetan monasteries and monastics under tighter control and eventually under their total supervision. One aspect of the issue is on the reincarnation of Tibetan Buddhist leaders. Since China has not been able to place the present Dalai Lama under its control, its transparent plan is to ensure the next Dalai Lama will be subservient to the Chinese Communist Party. Not only do the Chinese government's claims completely disregard centuries-old Tibetan religious tradition, they also violate the universal principle of religious freedom. The Dalai Lama has categorically maintained that only he can make a decision regarding his reincarnation. In 2011, he released a formal statement explaining his position on the reincarnation system and how he intends to handle the issue of his succession. With your permission, I would like to submit the full text of the Dalai Lama's statement for the record. By attempting to select the next Dalai Lama, the Chinese government also aims to extend its control over Tibetan Buddhism with clear geopolitical implications, even on many Tibetan Buddhist institutions in the Indian subcontinent, Mongolia, and other parts of the world where there are followers of Tibetan Buddhism. If not challenged vigorously by free countries, this decision would affect the religious freedom not only of Tibetans, but also of millions of followers of Tibetan Buddhism, including here in the United States. On the issue of techno-authoritarianism, and before I do that, I also want to say that the issue of these reincarnation process clearly linked to Chinese usage of the technology in Tibet to make the Tibetan people completely forget the Dalai Lama and to be subservient to the religious leaders the Chinese authorities themselves are appointing. The US and international bodies must recognize and investigate the continuity between past forms of oppression and present-day forms of persecution as fueling the same agenda to dismantle Tibetan unity through use of techno-authoritarianism. New, dangerously potent techno-surveillance and operation are now being perpetrated behind a digital iron curtain in an attempt to hide the reality on the ground and further extend the CCP's long arm of authoritarianism. We also must take seriously the pervasiveness of the surveillance in and outside of Tibet and the harm it's doing psychologically. During our annual advocacy day for Tibet here in Washington, D.C., we learned that one of our participants, a young student, had received a series of derogatory comments within hours of posting a video of herself in Tibetan clothes on TikTok, which was mentioned earlier. The posts range from standardized CCP propaganda to slurs and more. In a heartbreaking moment, she realized that she had started to even doubt who she was, what she was. That's not surveillance. That's digital harassment of a young American. And it reflects the length to which the CCP will go in its agenda to uproot identity as a whole. In the wake of the recent protests in Chinese cities against COVID restrictions, we saw reports of Chinese officials threatening the public through search of their mobile phones. For Tibetans, this search of their personal phones, belongings, and monasteries is the norm and has been the norm. Even today, the very possession of a portrait of the Dalai Lama, even on a mobile phone, is regarded as a crime and subjected to punishment. We have also heard of reports of Chinese authorities banning Tibetans from circulating Buddhist texts over the social media or through messaging platforms. In this connection, we commend the Biden administration for including Wu Yingzhe and Tang Hongbo, two senior Chinese officials, in its recent list of Treasury Department sanctions for the abuses of Tibetan human rights. The Chinese government should be held accountable for violating international laws and China's own laws when it comes to the rights of the Tibetan people. I would like to end with some recommendations from ICT. One, Yusuf should urge Biden administration to implement fully the Tibetan Policy Support Act of 2020, which says that the Chinese government should be held accountable for interfering in Tibetan reincarnation process system, including that of the Dalai Lama. Secondly, it should urge the Biden administration to work multilaterally with like-minded countries and international bodies, including the EU, to take coordinated initiatives. Third, we urge Yusuf to endorse HR 8365, promoting a resolution of the Tibet-China Conflict Act, which challenges abuse of Tibetan rights. Fourthly, Yusuf should call on the US Senate to introduce a similar legislation to HR 8365. Fifthly, Yusuf should urge Congress to pursue appropriate legislation to put in place meaningful barriers for the spread of techno-authoritarianism by China to other nations, including the United States. Six, China should be urged to release all prisoners, political prisoners, and particularly the 11th Panchen Lama, who has not been seen since 1995. Seventh, we urge Yusuf to organize a delegation to Tibet to understand the situation there, and also to urge Congress to do likewise. We know Congressman Frank Wood visited Tibet many years back. Eighthly, Yusuf should urge the State Department to make greater use of the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act by announcing the names of Chinese officials sanctioned under the Act. Ninthly, Yusuf should urge United Nations to conduct an analysis of forced separation of children from families to boarding schools, and including the use of a DNA database that was mentioned earlier. And lastly, Yusuf should urge the United States Congress, the European Union, the UN, and other international bodies to mount forceful opposition to the CCP's imposition of modern-day slavery in Tibet, including forced displacement of nomadic peoples and enclaves diverse from their centuries-old culture, which provides little or no meaningful employment opportunities. Thank you very much.